Okay, what we're doing, we're talking about the differences between the Cambridge International Pseudocode and Python code for either your Year 12 or your Year 13 exam. This video, let's talk about input and output. So when I'm writing Python code, I can use the print function or the print procedure to output literals or the value of variables. And the way that print works is I can give any number of arguments. And the arguments don't have to be of a specific type. I can do mixed arguments, right? And the same applies to pseudocode. So the only difference is that rather than having a procedure that does this job, we have a statement. Because it's not a procedure, it's not a subroutine, there are no brackets involved. So the keyword is just output. The same thing applies. You can output different values of different types or variables of different types separated by a comma. And let's talk about some things that you can't do in pseudocode. So something in Python is that you might need to think about controlling what happens after the end of the print. So rather than it always defaulting to a new line character, you can change the end value to make something print on the same line. So let's just see from my example here. You can see it's going to print 34, false, hello, and then print C, but still on the same line. So can you see how that works? So in pseudocode, that doesn't really exist. There is just an assumption that, let's check the pseudocode guide. I think it's the kind of thing you don't need to worry about. If the meaning is clear, you don't need to worry about if the new line is there or not. So there's no actual built-in syntax for that. What are some other things that you might know how to do in Python? Well, you might know about set. So rather than the comma generating a space, I can change the separator argument to something different. Again, things like that you do not need to worry about in pseudocode. You would need to think of a different way of doing it though, and maybe using the concatenation operator, which will come up in a later video, but the concatenation operator in pseudocode is the ampersand, whereas in Python the concatenation operator is the plus. If I wanted to do something like change the character between what is printed, I would need to think about using the ampersand, but then I would also need to think about making all of the types agree. So then we need to kind of come into thinking about, okay, what is the built-in function to allow me to turn it into a string? So we'll get onto built-in functions in a different video. Let's talk about input. So in Python, we can generate a prompt, answer my question, and then use the input function to force the user to give an input, and then the value that gets returned from the function can get stored in a variable. Let's think about how that same thing would need to look in pseudocode. So first of all, we need to declare the variable to store the input. We then need to use the output command to ask the question, and we then need to use the input command to store the variable. Let me just check that that's the right way around. Yeah, so the syntax is input and then variable names. So sometimes in a pseudocode algorithm, you don't really need to think about what's the question, just to put the X in there. But to match this exactly, this would be one line of Python code, but 3 lines of Cambridge International Pseudocode. So what we talked about today is the difference between input and output in Python versus the Cambridge International Pseudocode.